Hi, BookTube. Welcome to Jackie's Literary Corner. I am Jackie, and I'm finally filming my recap of 2022 video. And I'll actually be filming another video later. I don't know if I'll upload the other one today or not, but it will be my what I got for Christmas video. So, like I said, I don't know if I'll upload that one today or maybe tomorrow. But I'm gonna film them both today, so it's time. But the video I'm filming first is the recap of what I read in 2022. Now, I've already shared my uploaded and shared my favorites video, so I'll briefly mention those books. But but I won't talk about them too much since I've already talked about them. Although it might benefit because I know I kind of rushed one of those videos since I turned into a two-party, which I did not mean to do, but I was worried that in case I get interrupted again while filming, that I just wanted to at least get one video done, and then if I had to do part two all over again, then that would be, at least I got one ready to go. But luckily, I didn't get interrupted for like fifth time, so anyway, let's get started on recapping my reading for 2022. Now, the Goodreads and Storygraph, what it says for how many books I read, I don't think it's accurate. Especially Goodreads, because you guys know that I will say I will just mark them as read the books I DNF'd, because I don't want to leave them sitting there not being, because it will look like I'm coming back to them, and maybe in my mind it will look like I'm coming back to them. Maybe people look at my Goodreads, like my Goodreads friends won't see it that way, but I just feel like it feels incomplete if I don't mark it as complete, even if I did DNF it, because of course, when I DNF a physical book, I can remove it from my shelf, put it in the donation pile, or unless it's a library book, then I return to the library at some point. But on Goodreads, you can see it. So in my mind, it bugs me. So I feel like I need to say I completed it. So it will. So on Goodreads, it does count the DNFs. And on Storygraph, I think maybe it doesn't. Not the DNFs. I know it doesn't count the DNFs, but I did upload. I finally, earlier this year, I mean, not this year, it's the new year. Early in 2022, I finally transferred my Goodreads data onto Storygraph. So I think that counted that as read this year. And I did not read those books this year, so it shows that I read. I think it shows that I read, that some of those books have been read. Or it actually, no, it doesn't, but it shows two copies of a lot of books. And I don't know if I can just delete. I didn't want to delete those. I wasn't sure about that, or if I could, or if I wanted to, which I know doesn't make any sense, but it's just too much to explain. So I mean, it's probably not, but I'm being, I'm trying to figure out my brain. So according to my Word document I created, which I need to create one for 2023, but it's gonna be a different setup because I'm not going by monthly this year. I'm gonna do quarter wrap-ups instead of monthly wrap-ups, or bi-monthly wrap-ups. I might start doing like recent reads. Like, actually, I might film a recent reads today. Because I did make some progress on one of my books, a lot of progress, since I haven't been able to upload any videos, film and upload videos since I did my my favorites video. So I got to read a good chunk of it, despite the fact that I was, I had work for 3 days. Okay, I have 2 days off, which is nice to get a little break, because I hate going back to work as soon as although I didn't. I decided, we went out of town, and then I decided to go with my dad, come back with my dad, because I feel like I stayed a couple days at my grandma's, so I could, come back with my dad. I wouldn't have to feel bad. So I came back with him a couple days later, And we came back earlier than when I asked to have off. So I did have a couple days before I had to go back, but it's still hard when I have to go to work 3 days in a row. Because I don't have a schedule where I work 5 days a week. I only have a schedule. My schedule is part-time, and I only, and I'm only in, I guess, when it comes to like retail, which this deal, it still feels weird calling this retail because it's a grocery. When I think of retail, I think of clothes and stuff, or toys, or even the books. And I ended up going, but so I don't go 5 days in a row or 7 days in a row for work. So it's always, hard to go back and then work 3 days in a row and then, get a day off or get a couple days off. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking about that and get to the recap. So according to my Word document, I got really close to 100 books. I got 99 if I counted it right. Up to 99 books. Now, some of them were short stories, which I'm going to talk about on this video. And I count each story individually when I put them on Goodreads. Sometimes, not always, but if I can find the story as with a separate image, then I will count it as a separate thing. Like, because there's some story collections, especially a lot older ones, like a Dickens collection or something, I can't always find an image of a separate story from a collection. Or it might have that, when a book is to be announced or up and coming, but they don't have a cover yet. On Goodreads, they'll have that blank image of a book and then the title and the author's name. And sometimes it shows up as that, which I don't like because I want to have an image, a beautiful, cute little image to show you guys. But anyway, so yeah, the short stories really helped. Just like how audiobooks can really help, I think, for people to get a lot of reading, even though that's not the most important thing. The quantity of how many books you read is not the most important thing. But I think, as I've said before, I think along with other people like kind of the thrill of seeing your progress with your reading and seeing if you can get to that goal of reading 100 or even 150 or 100 or 200 books. I think it's fun. It's not just, I have to do this, and I don't care about the quality when I'm reading. I just have to, it's more about, it's just fun. It's kind of fun, the thrill and the rush of, seeing if you can do this. But, this year, in 2022, I made my goal 16 books. I was going to do it again in this year, but again, I was in between trying to decide how many books, and then finally, when the time in January 1st came around, I was like, I'm just gonna make it 50, because that was the last number I thought about making it. And I had gone into work that morning on the 1st, and then we were leaving my grandma's house after I got off work. So it was kind of a last minute decision to stick with the 50 books goal. And, if I get 100, that would be awesome. If I get to 100, that's great. And I know that it's not a big deal if I don't. If I get a little past it, that'd be awesome too. But so that's my official goal. I was in between trying to decide last time when I made my 7 on Sunday video on goals. So now I've decided 50 books. So I'm going to talk about a few categories of books and focus on a few categories of books. I'm not going to talk about, I'm not using the word genre because the categories are not genres. We have, except for one. Although I've always wondered if that is considered a genre or not. But I guess it is. And that's nonfiction. So I'm going to talk about nonfiction. That might be the last one I talk about. I'm going to talk about short stories that I read. And I'm going to talk about the audiobooks. And what is really cool is that like Emily Fox, who has mentioned in her stats videos that she was surprised that she read as much nonfiction that she did. So we have something in common. She's probably read more nonfiction than me, but we still both surprised ourselves and read a lot of nonfiction this year. So I thought that was kind of cool on a personal level. That like her, I surprised myself and did get into nonfiction even more so than I have been, which was kind of a more subtle, like a smaller goal that I wanted to focus more on nonfiction, try to get into it more, and I've been kind of getting into it. But I'm really, this year, I really read a lot of nonfiction, and I think what helped is I started the year out with nonfiction, making sure I read a nonfiction book, one nonfiction book each month, although I didn't read one each month. There were some months where I did not read nonfiction. But anyway, let me stop there with that and talk about that later, because I want to focus on the other categories. So first off, I'm going to talk about audiobooks, because that's the category that I don't have a lot to say. And again, I still have the same problem I always had when it comes to talking about audiobooks, is that I feel like it's hard for me to really critique an audiobook or a narrator of an audiobook, because I don't know. I just know in most cases I've liked all the narrators I've listened to. I don't have any problem. I don't have any critiques to offer or anything. And there's only one audiobook narrator that I did not like this year. And that was the audiobook narrator for this free audiobook I got, because there were some free ones available. So I took the opportunity and picked one particular that I was interested in, that I've been interested in a while. And I wasn't, and I had a copy of this author's works, but it was one of those big hardback, huge omnibus editions of his short stories. And it's hard to travel with that. So I wanted to pick something that I could travel with, and then this was free. This audiobook was free, so I was like, why not try it out? And that was 7 stories by H.P. Lovecraft. And the narrator, let me see, did I put the narrator down? Let me see, when did I listen? Yeah, I did not, damn it, I did not put the narrator down. Well, I don't remember who the narrator was, and I guess if it's any such, and maybe that's a good thing, because it's not a compliment to the narrator, because I didn't like him. I mean, nothing was wrong with his voice or anything, it's just, it was kind of boring and dull, and apparently, I know that sometimes those people, narrators or authors, don't like it when you criticize, are very opinionated and are very critical of them and their work. Like, Jess Owens did a video where she talked about, like, it wasn't about that, but there was a small little part where she talked about, like, this author posted a video about how she did not like people ranting and giving bad reviews of her works on YouTube. And I get that it's hard. I mean, I would be sensitive. I would get emotional if I ever became an author and then people really hated my work, so I thought it was really bad and gave a rant review. But I also know that getting mad at me, I don't want to deal with the conflict of getting mad and then someone getting mad back for me getting mad. So I would just separate myself and give myself some time if I read the review or watched the video on the review. If I ever, but that's only if I ever published a book. But I don't know if it's the same, if narrators would be the same way. Narrators of audiobooks would be the same way. But like I said, I didn't think to write down the narrators who narrated it. But some of the other ones I did, so I'll give them credit. But yeah, I was saying this one was kind of boring. It was kind of boring. But I listened to it because it was short stories. And I've been wanting to try H.P. Lovecraft because he was one of the early authors of this kind of genre, horror genre that has a little bit of a sci-fi feel, in my opinion, from some of them. And he's informed a lot of other authors who write horror, and I understand there are some people that are not comfortable with his work, with H.P. Lovecraft's work, because he was racist, and but I'm going for the stories, and I don't agree with his opinions, and he was definitely a product of his time, unfortunately. So the good news is I don't think he's alive anymore, so it's not like he'll get, well, maybe his family or whatever, or his estate will get money, I don't know, if you buy his books, but like I said, I don't agree with him. I just wanted to let people know, if you are someone that does not like H.P. Lovecraft and has a problem with him, I don't agree with the things he thought about certain groups of people. But anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. So yeah, and the only audiobook that I DNF'd this year was our 2022. I keep wanting to say this year, it's 2023, so it's not. But in 2022, the only audiobook I DNF'd, I don't even remember when I read it, or listened to it. I keep listen to it. I'm talking about audiobooks. I did not physically read these books. I listened to them. So the only one I DNF'd listening to was Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, because I was just very bored, and it wasn't the narrator in this case, because, I listened to the audiobook. It was just, I was bored with the story. Not a lot was going on. It was kind of a self-discovery type story, and this guy was trying to, wanted to be a monk or a Buddhist, or I don't know, and he was trying this new life for himself, and I got bored with his story. No, nothing, no offense, but it was just a boring story. Not a lot was going on. I'm sure the author, Hermann Hesse, is a brilliant writer, but that just wasn't for me. So that's the only one I DNF'd. And the other free audiobook was actually Realm of the Dragons, and then I could buy the other ones because it is the first book in a series, and I did like it. But it wasn't anything special. It was like a fantasy world, and that dragons once existed, and now one of the main characters has found a dragon egg, and it was cool. It was a cool story, but it wasn't like anything like the special. So, I can get the rest of the audiobooks. The rest of the series are not free, the audiobooks, but they are like $1.99, so it's not that expensive, so I could get them. But I need to wait until maybe February, because I'm once again on I have my budget, and I've already bought some books and spent money. In fact, I placed an order on Thrift Books, which I decided to exercise some self-control, and I'm gonna try to see if I can make it 2 months without, because last year and the year before, I think I did the 1 month thing, and then this year I think I'm gonna do 2 months, see if I can get away with 2 months of not buying anything online, book-wise anyway. Which is gonna be hard, because I hear about books on Goodreads and stuff like that, and I can't just go to Books A Million whenever I want. And then the Walking Distance bookstore, you guys know, doesn't have the ideal selection. So I'm gonna focus, like I said, I always want to focus on my personal collection that I already bought. But anyway, so back to the recap. So and I feel like that would count. I don't know if I would count that as, I'm still trying to decide if that would count as online. I mean, it's on an app. Buying those books, if I bought those, and it would be on audiobooks. I wouldn't have a physical copy to take up space. But I was still, but I might still wait. I'll probably still wait until, before I get the rest of that series. But anyway, so those were the free audiobooks, and the Hermann Hesse Siddhartha book was also a free one too, so I didn't spend any money, and it wasn't a waste. Because if I did, I probably would try to stick it out and listen to it if I spent a lot of money, but thankfully it was a free audiobook. So I didn't feel bad DNFing it. Okay, so let me go through this. Okay. There was no audiobooks in January. And let's see. February. Was there any audiobooks in February? Oh, I totally forgot. Plain Mad Heroines was an audiobook. And I totally forgot about that when I was practicing. So Plain Mad Heroines is an audiobook. That's right. And I did not, oh, dang it. I did not put the narrator for that one either. I'll be right back. I might be able to look on my phone because I have it on my phone. Said I want to give credit to the narrators. I'm actually listening to an audiobook right now. One that I previously one that I had
Chapter 1.
Oh, crap!
7 HP
Crap.
Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public.
Sorry if you guys heard that. I did not mean to click on that. So I can't click on it. Oh, what's the author? I got only 29%. Dang it, I don't know if I'll be able to see the narrator. Dang it. I don't think I'll be able to get the narrator. Oh, wait, oh, no. Dang it, I was hoping I could look on my, dang it. I was hoping I could look, but if I click on it, then it'll start playing as what just happened. Okay, I am very unprepared at the moment. Let me just call it. Let me see if I can call it up. Because I want to give credit to the narrators. My books. Okay, come on. Okay, oh, wait, where am I putting the author? Bad. Okay, sorry about that, you guys. Dang it. Okay. Let's see, I'm trying to get the... Oh, this is gonna be a name I can't pronounce. Z Sands? X-E Sands? I, don't know how to pronounce that. I feel bad for not being able to pronounce that. That's the narrator. Like I said, I liked her voice. Like I said, I don't have a lot to say about narrators. But I do want to give them credit. So this was on my list of favorite books. But I totally forgot that this was an audiobook when I listened to took in the story and I listened to it. So when I was practicing what I was gonna say in this video. But yeah, this was an audiobook. This was one of my audiobooks. Okay, so yeah, so I listened to an audiobook in February, and that was that one. Oh, actually, I guess I listened to 3 audiobooks. I did not, if I had remembered that, Plain Mad Heroines. Dang it. Oh, okay, so I basically, in the beginning of the month, I was not writing the narrators, and it wasn't until later in the year that I started writing the narrators down of these audiobooks. I get a better idea. Let me see. I can go on, Goodreads on my phone here. Okay, and then okay, I don't know why. I mean, I brought the stupid thing over. Okay, so red. Let's see if I can. Let me do a search. Okay. Across. The other one. So I also listened to Across the Green Grass Fields. Okay, here it is. It doesn't say it. Book details. Let's see. This one was an audiobook. Okay, and wait. Editions. Let's see. Don't go away. Okay, that's hardcover. Here's it. Okay, come on. Okay. Anna Maria Carlson. That's the narrator of Across the Green Grass Fields. Which I like that one, by the way. I thought it was a really good story. I know not everybody did, but I liked it. No, I'm not. I think for some people the contributing factor is it's a standalone story, so it's whole new characters. And I think a lot of people that a lot of girls that grew up as horse girls would probably like this one, probably love this one. And I liked horses. Now I wouldn't say was a horse girl, but yeah, so that was Anna Maria. And then let me find the narrator for this one. This is one of my nonfiction reads that I read. I read two audiobooks that were I listened to two audiobooks that were here it is. That were nonfiction, which I think it can really help when you're reading when it's nonfiction. If you're struggling with it, then I think having listening to listening to an audiobook can really help get you into it, because it's because it's someone else reading you the story, so it makes it a little bit easier to read it if it's okay. Where's the narrator? Ria Kaplan was the narrator. This was a book about asexuality. I had heard about Ace, but that one cost a little bit more. I didn't get this off Libby because Libby did not have it. I bought it on my audiobook reader on here. So I actually bought it, and it was a little bit cheaper than Ace because Ace was a new book at the time when I got it. So I decided to start with the book that was an introduction to asexual, because it's something I want to learn more about and understand it. Especially like to determine things about myself. And I think it's a pretty good one. A pretty good audiobook, and a good book to kind of introduce you to the idea of asexuality. Like I said, the narrator was Ria Kaplan. And again, good narrator. You know, I mean, like I said, I don't have a lot to say about the narrators. There's only a few, like this year, there's only one I didn't like, as I already mentioned, and that was, funnily enough, the one that I accidentally started playing again, and that's the H.P. Lovecraft stories. And then, the only other time I didn't like a narrator, or it wasn't that I didn't like them, I just preferred I wanted someone else, was the Lord of the Rings, the original audiobooks, I think it was that. the original audiobooks. I did not really care for the narrator, and I wanted to, but that's also because I want the Andy Serkis one, and I'm gonna have to get that on, and I can't get that one on my audiobook reader on my phone. That's not, it's not Libby. Can't get them from Libby. But anyway, so let's see. Hopefully this is the only time I'll have to look up the narrator so I can give them credit. Okay, so that was that. And then I didn't read any audiobooks. Oh, March was when I read the HP listen to. Sorry, I keep saying read. It's just a habit. That's when I listened to the H.P. Lovecraft stories. And like that was the one I accidentally played, not realizing that. But yeah, I didn't care for the narrator with that one. I thought he was kind of boring. Which you are a little glimpse of. I think you might have heard. And okay, I'll keep that here so in case I need to look up for any other narrators. April, there was no audiobooks listened to in April. May, there was no audiobooks listened to in May. But I will talk about May for another category. Okay, and so in June, again, I listened to 2 audiobooks in June. And that's when I listened to the other free audiobook, The Dragon Realm. And again, I forgot to put the narrators. Okay, so now I have to look up those narrators so I can give them credit. Okay, so let's see. Let's look up those books. Okay. First, we're gonna look up the other one, the Dragon. Oh wait, nope, never mind. I was thinking this was Dragon Realm, but I listened to Dragon Realm. When did I listen to that one? Because I know. Okay, where did I listen? When did I? Oh, so that was April. So I did listen to an audiobook in April. Realm of the Dragons by Morgan Rice. That was the one I mentioned earlier. That is a series. I could get the next books for like $1.99. So, okay. Let me see. Let me find that. Sorry, I'm so unprepared. I should have wrote these. I should have wrote these narrators. Okay, what was it called? Okay. Oh, I hate when every time when I'm trying to type the A, because the A and the S on keyboards are right next to each other. Especially, I do this all the time on my phone when I'm texting. I'm always hit the S when I meant the A. Here it is. Okay. Okay, so let's see. Book details. Oh wait, no, not that one. I need. Here it is. Here's the audiobook. For a second, it said only one book available in this, so I thought I was gonna find the. Okay, it does not say the narrator at the top, unless Morgan Rice narrated her own books. Okay, it doesn't have the narrator. Okay, damn it. It does not have the narrator on this one. So I can't get credit to the narrator unless Morgan Rice is the narrator. Unless, like, she narrated her own book. And I don't remember what this Armin's right for not writing down the narrator. Because they do say at the beginning of each book who the narrator is. So I need to remember that. And I did later on this year start writing down who narrated these books. But, so I don't have that one unless Morgan Rice narrated her own books. But anyway, so I can find... Okay, so I don't have the narrator for that one. Okay, let's look for... Ashoko. No, see, that's not... I meant to type H and I typed F instead, I think. No. Here it is. Okay, and another audiobook, which I listened to 3 Star Wars audiobooks, which I love the Star Wars audiobooks because they have sound effects. I think that is a really cool idea to give you. And I think there are other audiobooks that do this, add sound effects and stuff. And I think that really helps immerse you into the story you're listening to. You're not just hearing someone read it to you. You actually hear the sound of all the different, like, props and, you know, vehicles and all the stuff that they use, or, like, you know, what's happening in the, you know, the background of the story, like weather and stuff like that. Okay, so this was the book is by E.K. Johnston. Let me see if I can find... It's the Kindle edition. Okay, here's... Okay, yep. Okay, let's see if it gets the... So Ashley Eckstein is the narrator, and I did like her. She sounded very young, so her voice fit the story. And I don't know if I've heard her voice before. I mean, I think I remember her sounding familiar. But yeah, this was a really good audio. It was a young adult. It was about the character of Ahsoka, who is a character that I was introduced to when I watched The Mandalorian. Her character is an adult, and then I heard she was also in the Clone Wars series, animated series, so I started watching that. I didn't get very far, though, because it's a long series, but it recommended, if you want to, before you watch the Kenobi series, to check out that series. So I started watching that first, but like I said, it's a long one, so... And it's an animated series, so they can get more episodes in because they're 30 minutes long. So yeah, Ashley Eckstein is the narrator. Okay, so yep, so I listened to that. So that was the audiobook I listened to in June. Did I listen to any audiobook? Yep, the Thrawn audiobooks. Do I have seen? This is when I started writing down the narrators, I think. Yeah, this is when I started actually writing down the narrator, so I don't need that anymore. So the Thrawn books, it's a trilogy about a character that works for the Empire. And he's kind of a Sherlockian type of character. You know, he's charming and clever and is very good at strategy and deducing things and all that. And he's very likable, even though he works for the Empire, which they're the bad guys in Star Wars universe. But I feel like that's realistic. I feel like a lot of times there are people, like, there's no good guys or bad guys. There's just people that have different points of view and different thoughts. I mean, there are people that have views to most people are just really bad, but they don't see themselves as bad guys. They see themselves as doing the right thing. But, I mean, and clearly, you know, it's obvious that, you know, Darth Vader was a bad guy and all that. But, there are probably people that were working for him, working for Darth Vader and Palpatine and the Empire because they were good and they believed in the cause. They thought they were doing right, and not necessarily that they're much just twirly villains or anything. And, you know, Like they just thought, like I said, they thought they were doing the right thing. So Thrawn, the audios are really cool. I haven't listened to the last one yet. There's only 3, so I could have listened to it in 2022, but I ended up not getting around to it. But I listened to 3 audiobooks. These are novels by Timothy Zahn, and the narrated by Mark Thompson. And he has a nice voice. He's good with characters, these different types of characters. Now I know I imagine it is hard as a narrator if it's just one person narrating it and you have to do the voice of the opposite sex. I imagine it's probably hard to do, because without thinking, without worrying about, does it sound okay? Because there's still gonna be that, you're still gonna somewhat be able to tell, and they can't change their voice completely, so you're still gonna know it's like the opposite sex. But I mean, that's the thing. Like, even though, there was that one narrator that I didn't like, and I feel bad for saying that, because I'm sure it's a hard job to do. I know I couldn't do narration. I already have trouble with, I used to, elementary school, I would get pulled out for speech therapy, because I know I have trouble being clear and enunciating and being loud, and I always feel like I sound very nasally, even when I'm not sick. So I give props to, even if I didn't like the narrator, thought they were boring, I still give them, credit. Which I guess maybe I should give you the author for that Sid Arthur. Let me go ahead and see if I can find the one. Let me see if I can find, because I still probably should give him credit. Here it is. No, it was Sid Arthur, not the author. Okay, it does give the translator. Yeah, although I got pretty far into the corner of this. I got 28%. Okay, oh, here it is. Good, it says it right here. Firdaus Bamji, I don't know how to say it. That's the narrator for the Sid Arthur audiobook that I got. But Firdous, that's the first name, and then the last name is Bamji. So I don't know how to pronounce that, but that's the guy who did the one book that unfortunately. Oh wait a second. That's not the one. I'm sorry. That's not the one that I didn't like. That's the one that I just DNF'd, and I thought he was okay. I don't have any problem with him. So that's right. That was not the one. Sorry to that guy. He was a good narrator. That's not the one I ended up not liking, actually. That I don't know why I was thinking about that one. Let's 7. Let me see if I can find. Actually, you know what? I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna. I'm not going to, because then I feel bad because it's a narrator I didn't like from the 7H. I was gonna look it up, but it was one that I didn't like. So the 7 H.P. Lovecraft stories narrator. Okay, so I listened to that one, and then the last audiobook I think I listened to I think this is the last audiobook. I'll look at the other months, see if I listen to any more audiobooks. But the last one I think was The Last Night in the Telegraph Club. So I actually wrote down, like I said, this is when so I was actually writing down narrators this time. So the narrator was Emily Wu Zeller, and I thought her voice sounded familiar because I thought she might have been the narrator for the which dang it, I cannot believe I forgot this. Six Crimson Cranes was an audiobook. That's why. So I listened to that one back in June. So yes, that was an audiobook too. So I think that narrator might have been the same woman, for the Last Night at the Telegraph Club. And that was the narrator for Last Night in the Telegraph Club was Emily Wu Zeller. So I think she was the one who also narrated Six Crimson Cranes, which I listened to on audiobook as well. I totally forgot that. I am so sorry. Before I go back to that, I'm gonna look that one up too, just to check. I remember looking at it before. But I don't remember if it was confirmed that it was the same narrator or not. But let's see, did I listen to any other books? I better check because it seems like I've forgotten some of them. Was Mary Jane? Nope, that was physical. So yeah, I don't think I listened to any other. Oh, well, I guess this September was when I finished the audiobook for Alexander Hamilton. But that one I started earlier this year. So I don't have the narrator for that one apparently. So let me look up that one. Oh, I didn't. It did not unlock. See, I don't know how, how on some iPhones you can put your face and so that can unlock your phone. Well, I cannot figure out how to do that. I don't know if sometimes it seems to work and sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so let me look up let me first look up Alexander Hamilton. I know I should be more prepared. I know there are some people who probably tell me I should be more prepared and this is unprofessional. But I'm not trying to be professional. Oh, well, at least it. No! Why did... Damn it. There it is. I hate when, you type, it looks like you're right. Okay, let's see. Book details. Okay, editions. Okay, let's see, where is it? Kindle. Here's the audiobook. Okay, so it's narrated by Scott Brick. Which that name sounds familiar, but maybe I'm just remembering from hearing them say it on it being said in the audiobook. But Scott Brick is the narrator of Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow, the audiobook for that one. And let me look up Six Crimson Cranes because I forgot I listened to that on audiobook as well. Okay, go away. I keep getting these notifications are kind of annoying sometimes. Because then they get in the way, especially if I'm in the middle of something on here and then it pops up. Okay, six. Crimson. Here it is. Okay, so let me get to. It was cute. It was a cute story. I liked it. Book details. 30 edition. Okay, so ebook. Kindle edition. Hardcover. Oh, here's the audiobook. Okay. Okay, again, another one that doesn't say the narrator. That's why it didn't say the narrator. It's kind of annoying because if you want to give the narrator credit, then you need to know who it is. It doesn't say. It just says who wrote it. And this is the audiobook. Oh, wait, here, no, it doesn't say there. Why doesn't, I don't get that. Why, shouldn't it say the narrator? It does not say it. That bugs me. I feel like if you want to give credit to a narrator who worked really hard to narrate your book, you should put it on there. Who narrated it. And apparently some of these books don't have it. So, like I said, I think it was the same one who narrated. Where is it? Oh, and A Small Angry Planet, that's right. So I listened to A Small Angry again, and when I forgot, I listened to A Small Angry Planet in August, which was narrated by Rachel Dulude. And again, liked it. It was a good audiobook. I don't know if I'll continue it or not, but where is it? What was the other? Okay, Last Night at the Telegraph Club. The narrator was Emily Wu Zeller. I think that was the same narrator for Six Crimson Craze. I think it was that one where they sounded similar. I don't know if it was her or not, but they sounded very. I think that was the one where I thought they sounded similar. The authors. Okay, so yep. So also, is that all the audiobooks? Listen to any audiobooks? Okay, I don't think I listened to any audiobooks. Okay, so August. Oh, City of Brass. Sorry, I keep forgetting these. It seems like it's been forever that I can't remember them. Maybe I feel like I should maybe the audio, since it's taken me so long. Maybe I should have made this a separate this audiobook video discussion video as a separate thing. Because I still got to talk about all the other things I read too. So City of Brass was also an audiobook. Somnila Canny. I mean, they say the author is on the audiobook, but it's like I said, it's been so long I even forget that I listened to these on audiobook. Somnila Nankini? Connie? I don't know. Sorry. Okay, let me look. Okay, I don't think. Yeah, the rest of the year I didn't listen to any audiobooks. So my last audiobook was City of Brass, and that was in September. Wait, was that in September? Oh, my last audiobook was actually Alexander Hamilton. It was more like I finished it in September. I think I started it in July. So that was my last one. Okay, so I think I'm good. I think I gave you all the audiobooks I listened to. So it's a pretty good year for audiobooks. I didn't listen to a whole lot. But I think I do agree that listening to audiobooks can really help if you want to read more books, even though it's like, or if you don't want to buy the physical copy of the book, but you want to listen to it. I mean, you want to still take in the story. You can listen to an audio. I think listening to an audiobook can really help and can allow you to take in the story without having to have a physical copy and take up space on your shelf. And if it's something that you are intrigued by, interested in, but you're not sure if you want to have, again, you're not sure if you want a physical copy, but it's something you want to, well, basically said the same thing. Okay. So that's that's basically the same thing. I don't know why I said that like it's a separate thing. It wasn't. And also, and like I tried to say earlier, it's really good for nonfiction or for any genre where you're not sure how you feel about it and you just want to try the genre. Because I don't know if nonfiction is really a genre, but if you want to try it out, but if something that you have a hard time physically reading, audiobooks can really help as well. And of course, people that literally that can't physically read, it's also beneficial. So that's why it does count. You're not physically reading the words, someone is reading it to you, but you are still taking in the story. I think the whole confusion is more like technicalities, where it's like, you're not literally reading, but you're still taking in the story. So it's like, who cares? Why does the technicality matter? But for apparently a lot of people, they will clarify, well, actually, you're not reading, you're listening. but it's still the same idea of taking in a story. You're just not staring at the pages and reading the words yourself. Someone is reading it to you, so you're not the one physically reading it, if you want to get technical. But telling someone, especially if they can't physically read, like because they are blind, literally, and they can't see things, and the only way for them to take in a story is listening to it, then telling them, oh, you're not reading that can be all because of a technicality, all because you're not like literally reading, telling them that you're not a reader, that I think that's a little unfair. Okay, anyway, now that we're done with the audiobooks, let's get to the, sorry, this video is going to be longer than I thought because I spent so much time on audiobook discussion. Longer than I thought I would. Okay, so now let's talk about short stories. Most of my short story reading took place in May. September and October. So the short stories, so let's see. So short story wise, May, the only collection of short stories I read was Skeleton Crew. I didn't read all of them. I still haven't finished it, but I feel like with short stories you can get away with that, where you don't have to read the whole thing all at once. Because in most cases the short stories are not continuations of the same story, of like, they're just little separate stories that might have a theme, but they're not continuations of the previous story. So you can get away with reading them, not reading the whole thing all at once. And Stephen King actually has quite a lot of short story collections. And I think horror is probably is something I can get into more when it comes to short stories, but I still struggled with these collections because I still felt unsatisfied with some of them. Some of them I did like, and some of them I felt like there was potential there, and I wish I expanded them more, but it's just the author chose to make it a short story. And I think, and again, I do think horror is a genre you can get away with that, because, it's kind of, horror has to have a mystery element, and sometimes it happening within a few pages, only having a few pages to get the story, can get you thinking about it a lot more, and can be almost make it creepier, if that makes sense. So, I'll first talk about all the ones I read in May, all the stories I read in May, and then I'll mention the ones that I liked and didn't like. Okay, so The Monkey, Cain Rose Up, Miss Todd Shortcut, The Jaunt, The Wedding Cake, and Paranoid, The Chant. And I liked The Monkey. I liked the premise of that one, and I also liked the premise of Todd Shortcut and The Jaunt. I liked what they explored in what he explored in those stories. Like, in The Monkey, it was a cursed object, and it was like, is it cursed, or is our main character unstable? Like, is he crazy or not? Or is this object actually cursed and these bad things are happening, or because of the monkey toy, or is it power of persuasion? Like, the guy's persuading himself and these things happen, so he's thinking, oh, it's because of this toy. And also he's already having problems with his family, with his wife and older son. So it's kind of the same thing as the unreliable narrator, like that certain authors explore, like the woman on the train, how she was an alcoholic and already have, her husband, I think, cheated on her in that story. Or like in Secret Garden, the guy, he caught his wife cheating, and I think he was also a bit of an alcoholic too, and he was isolated for most of the story. And Miss Todd Shortcut was a really cool story. It was a story within a story. Basically, these old gentlemen are swapping stories, and one of them tells about this couple that were visiting for the summer, visiting their town for the summer. They have, summer people who come to stay in certain towns for just during that season. And he's telling about this rich guy and how he kind of had a crush on the guy's wife, his first wife, Miss Todd, the first Miss Todd, and how she was obsessed with the idea of finding shortcuts when traveling. Not shortcuts to a test or something, but shortcuts, on the road, like when you're traveling. And she finds this one particular shortcut that she tells the guy about, and she takes him along for the ride, and something a little unsettling happens, something creepy, and I would love to see this one on screen. But yeah, this one had a really creepy atmosphere and a small town atmosphere, which Stephen King does really well. And I also like The Jaunt, which was the idea of exploring, I guess it was supposed to be in the future. It's kind of more science fiction story, and how someone had invented this teleportation device, and this guy is telling his kids about the story of how that was created, and telling them what they have to do to make sure they get through it safely. So kind of unlike Star Trek, which I always wondered if Star Trek inspired this one a little bit, because in the Star Trek shows they have this. And I know in the Next Generation, there was a character who was afraid of it and was paranoid of what could happen if he went through it. And this kind of explores the idea of the negative aspects of that and the dangers of that. But I thought it was a really cool idea, and I liked this one. The ones I didn't like, where Cain rose up, I barely remember that one. I feel like I would need to reread that one to give it a fair chance, because I feel like I didn't really give it a fair shot. But I barely remember that one. And then Paranoid, The Chant was a poem I think I read really a little too quickly to really understand what it was about. It was one of these things where I was like, oh, I can squeeze this one in because it's kind of a poem, so it's not as long. And The Wedding Gig felt like something in a larger work, which a lot of times that's what I feel about with short stories. They're, a lot of times I feel like they're part of a larger work, like a bigger story. And then, okay, so that's what I remember. Those were what I read in May. Now, I started to read more of the short stories in September, and I was kind of going for a spooky theme in September. More Halloween type stories, scary stories, and spooky stories, because of, I was originally planning on participating in Booktober like I always do, and then I decided in October that I was more in a witchy mood. But I read, this was I started out September. I didn't read a short story first. I read a novel first that I got from the library, and I ended up DNFing another one I got from the library, which is My Heart is a Chainsaw. I started that one in September, but then I ended up DNFing it because I wasn't feeling it. So I couldn't put that one on here, but that was a DNF. So The Raft was also from the Skeleton Crew. That was the first short story I read that in September. I really like that one. I could see that one on screen, like, as a teen short story, because it's about a group of 4 teens, these 2 guys and their girlfriends, and one of them suggests they go, and this is the middle of autumn, like October or something, and he, wanting to impress his girlfriend, who was checking out the other guy, who's kind of one of those guys, he's rebellious, he's hot, and he's obnoxious, and he doesn't listen to, adults or anything. And so he's his cool best friend. All the girls want him, so our narrator's trying to get his girlfriend back from checking him out, because he has suspicions that she's into him, like most girls probably are in the story, in that universe. And he suggests they go to this lake. And of course it's October, so it's freezing cold, but they decide to jump in and swim out to this raft that's always there. And our narrator notices something in the water, something a little weird, and they dismiss it. But then something happens, that thing starts moving towards them. And so I thought it was really creepy, and it's something, something that you don't expect it to be a threat. It looks perfectly harmless, or at least, or at least something that can be avoided, that can be ignored, as long as you're careful. And one of his friend was like, oh, it's probably just an oil spill. And I think I could see this, I would love for a Stephen King anthology, kind of like what they do with the Twilight Zone, where they show, which I think they have done that. There was one that they did, and I would love to see another, if they could do that again with some of these other ones, like Skeleton Crew. Because there's, some of these stories I would like to see on screen. And then, so this was when I bought it because I was disappointed with the narrator for that audiobook of 7 H.P. Lovecraft stories. I bought an edition of H.P. Lovecraft stories. I don't know how many it had. I don't know if it had more or less than that one. It didn't have all the ones that were on the audiobook. But it started out with the first one that was on the audiobook. And I vaguely remembered it. At least I remember the title anyway. But, which is one that I liked, was Dagon. It's like this guy escapes a German POW boat. And he ends up on this shipwrecked on this island that's full of rotting. Everything's rotting. There's a bunch of dead fish. And he sees something there that kind of freaks him out. It's not just the dead fish, but something else. And I really liked that one. That was unsettling. It's one of the stories that explores kind of isolation and losing, and something causing you to lose your mind. Seeing something that is terrifying. I liked that one. I liked The Statement of Randolph Carter, which was one where these guys go to a gravesite, and one of their friends goes into a mausoleum and apparently sees something, but his friends and you, the reader, don't see it. You just hear him responding to it, which I think I think that I agree that is a good, not showing the horror makes it all the more terrifying because you can't see what it looks like. You don't know what you're facing. And it's one of those stories that starts out at the end of the story, where the characters have some of them have survived, and it's more about telling what happened. But yeah, that was good. And the facts concerning Arthur German and his family, I did not like that one. Cellophase, I don't even remember that one. That's another one I need to reread because I don't even remember what that one was about. And this is one that I cannot pronounce the title. I can't say it. It's Nyarlathotep. I don't know if I said that right. Maybe one of you can tell me the ones if I got that right. But how to pronounce that. But this is a I guess I could do it because I did find on Google, after I typed in the title of a book I got for Christmas, that did give me the pronunciation, how to pronounce it. So maybe I should have done that earlier, but I don't want to make this video any longer by having to go through that trouble. So, but I think he was an Egyptian god, and our narrator was afraid, like he was a death god or something. So not Anubis, obviously, but some, But I think he was Egyptian. So there's that one, and that one was okay. Okay, and then I also read not H.P. Lovecraft. I just talked about H.P. Lovecraft. And then I have 3 Edgar Allan Poe stories, which, funnily enough, the short stories I read in October were from a book, an anthology, that's In the Shadow of Edgar Allan Poe. So I think they were stories inspired by Poe, or similar to his style and his themes. But the ones from Poe I actually read were, first I read The Descent into the Maelstrom. And that was one that felt like it was a part of a bigger story. like a chapter of a story. And it was really cool being inside the Maelstrom, like getting the story while the characters are in the Maelstrom. Which I think is kind of like a vortex in the water, that you're, like a twister in the water. And I think that one, like I said, it felt like a chapter in a longer story, but still it was pretty good. It was created this exciting, thrilling, terrifying atmosphere, because you don't know if these guys are gonna get out of this, if they're gonna drown or not. So that was really good. So that was pretty good. The next one I just thought were okay. I liked the first one. This is when we meet Poe's detective, Dupin, which I think he's French. I don't know, maybe not French, maybe American. I don't know, but this is when we meet his detective, who is very similar to Sherlock Holmes. Now, I don't know who came first, his or Sherlock Holmes. I want to say Sherlock Holmes came first. I meant to look that up, but I'm pretty sure Sherlock Holmes came first. But the mystery, the murders in the Rue Morgue, I liked that better than the sequel, because we actually have the detective and his assistant going to actually investigate. While in the sequel, they're just talking about it. Like, we do get flashbacks in the sequel, but it just felt so dry and long, and just like nothing was happening. Like, they're talking about the case, so we do get get flashbacks of it, of the mystery, but we're just being told it. So that was a bit of a disappointment. But I like the first one because they actually physically go to investigate, like A Study in Scarlet and all the other Sherlock Holmes stories, which apparently is gone. Like, not all of them were in public domain, only some of them were, and now they all are. Daniel Green did on his Fantasy News. He talked about that. So there was that. Okay, so next we have October short stories. So like I said, I read a collection. I didn't read the whole thing. I only read some of them. That was In the Shadow of Edgar Allan Poe. And I think there's another book that's In the Shadow of another author that I either saw on Goodreads or in the library. I cannot remember. But my priority was The Yellow Wallpaper and then a Kate Chopin story, Desiree's Baby. So I have The Awakening in a bind-up with other stories in it. And I want to say I saw Desiree's Baby in that one. So I was like, well, I have it here in this collection, so let me go ahead and read it. So first I read The Yellow Wallpaper, which I heard a lot about that from Caroline Marie Reads, and Emmy or Emma, because I know two Emma booktubers with the name Emma, and hers just goes by, I think on the title of her channel name is Emmy, I think. I don't know. But I think she was the first person to talk about this. Her and Caroline. And it was really good. It was kind of sad. Like, some of these stories weren't scary, they were disturbing or sad. Both of them were really tragic, but I loved the Yellow Wallpaper. It's this woman who, it's by Charlotte Gilman Perkins. It was this woman who, I think she was going through depression, I believe. And they didn't know what that was. And her and her husband are going to their vacation home. They bought a vacation home, and the doctor, something, he knows her husband knows there's something wrong with his wife, so he takes her to the doctor, who prescribes the rest cure, which is basically where you don't do anything, you don't think or anything, just sit in your room and maybe eat and drink, and that's it. And she starts obsessing over the yellow wallpaper that's covering the room, and I think we were told, it was meant to be baby room, and she becomes obsessed with the wallpaper, believing it's really ugly, and starts hallucinating that someone's trapped within the wallpaper. Her husband and her brother-in-law think, this is the best thing for her. It's the only, it will cure her if she just sits and rests. And I know that the author had a similar, what inspired was having an experience like this, but she didn't actually lose her mental capabilities like the woman does in the story. But she decided to write this into a story and then publish it. So she broke the rules of the rest cure. Um, and she also gets paranoid about her family, about her husband and brother-in-law and sister and everything. So it was really good and really dealt with mental health issues and what not to do with a person that has those. So it was really good. And then Desiree's baby was very tragic, had to deal with, you know, very, racism, and how this woman, I think if I'm remembering correctly, she was a woman that could pass for white, but even she didn't know that she was actually black. And she falls in love with a white man, and they get pregnant, and then he finds out through the baby that the baby is black, the baby, and he gets pissed and thinks that she lied to him, and that just pissed me off. But unfortunately, it was during a time when it was looked upon as that was okay behavior. That's the way you handle it when you're. I mean, and it kind of reminds me in Across the Green Grass Fields, where it was a similar situation where, like, the girl finds out. So the main character in that one is, I believe the term is hermaphrodite. I don't know if I'm correct saying. I don't know if that's the correct term. If it's not, I apologize. Maybe someone can correct me. But it's when you're born with both boy and girl parts, I believe, and she didn't know until puberty time happened, and she wasn't experiencing what you're supposed, if because she was raised as a girl, and she did not experience what happens as a girl when you get to puberty. And so finally she talks to her parents about it, and they finally decide, they explain to her, and that they want to raise her as a girl, but they were going to tell her when she was old enough to understand it and she can decide for herself. And then her friend, who is all about, oh, this is how girls are supposed to be. Like, your parents let her to believe girls are supposed to like tea parties and wear pretty dresses and play with dolls and all that. And horses were okay, apparently, even though taking care of a horse can get messy. Because, you clean up the crap on their hooves, and, they can make you smelly. You can smell, like, all the different odors that are in a stable. And horses can poop a lot and all that. But that was okay because horses are cute and pretty, and girls love horses. And so she's okay with horses. But they had previously had a friend before that was into, I think it was bugs. She liked collecting bugs and stuff. She found insects really cool. And so their little friend, their friend was like, you're doing boy stuff. You're not allowed to be part of our group anymore. So she kicks her out of the group. So our main character's afraid to tell her. And when she does tell her, the girl gets mad. It's like, you lied to me. You said you were a girl, but you're really a boy, which is dumb. And it's like, but she's also like a preteen, I think. So I was like, I want to smack her on the one hand, but on the other hand, I was like, okay, you clearly don't understand the repercussions of your saying this to your friend, saying she lied to you when she did not. You don't understand how all this works, the science of all this, and what's your friend's, that this was how she was born and nothing is wrong with that. So it's like, on the one hand, she's a little girl who does not understand, but on the other hand, I still was like, you did not need to be this horrible person, your friend. And our main character runs away and finds a door, afraid to go home. She finds a door into a horse world. So that reaction reminds me of what happened in Desiree's baby. The same thing where you just get so angry, but at the same time you're not really surprised, because, like, of course people act that way, act so mean and self-centered and just inconsiderate with someone's feelings, because it's all about them and how you didn't tell them even though you didn't know. And then, okay, so the other short story was The Sandman by E.T.A. Hoffman. And no, this is E.T.A. Hoffman. I'm not talking about the Neil Gaiman graphic novel that did become a show. This is a short story by the same guy who wrote The Nutcracker. And I gotta admit, I was a little confused by the beginning, what the beginning had to do with the story, but I'm sure there's a reason. This title refers to something that happened in the beginning, I think, with something our narrator witnesses with our main character, I should say. I don't think he's our narrator. But our main character witnessed something when he's a little boy. His father was someone that he calls the Sandman. So as an adult, he meets this mysterious woman who he sees her so beautiful and just falls in love with her and wants to marry her and everything. And other people don't see it. People don't get it. Like, they don't see the appeal of her. And he dumps his girlfriend for this other woman. And she's not very talkative. She's just silent, very reserved. And he just doesn't understand why no one else sees her beauty and how wonderful she is. And ends up being gets a little creepy. And I really like that one. Then The Mummy's Foot had a lot of potential. It kind of was more fantastical with a little bit of a ghost element to it. By Théophile Gontier. Like, this guy gets a mummy's foot, and it was a foot of a princess, an Egyptian princess, and she comes back. Her spirit comes back to claim her foot back, and is very appreciative that he had it. So she decides to reward him. And then an account of some strange disturbances in Angier Street by Joseph Sheridan LeFanu. This was kind of a haunted house story where these guys are told that the house they're staying in is haunted. They don't believe it, but then a lot of strange things happen at night. And then The Upper Berth by F. Marion Crawford. I don't remember what that one was about. I would need to reread that, but I don't have this collection anymore because it was a library book. And then the last one was His Unquenchable Enemy by W.C. Morrow, and I really like this one. It was a revenge story about this guy who was he was a servant to the Sultan, and he wanted revenge because this guy was, I don't remember what the Sultan did, if he hurt his family or hurt him, but he wants revenge for some reason. I wish I could remember what the reason was. And every time he tried to go after the Sultan, part of his body would get cut off. Till eventually all that was left was this part, this upper half, and then either an arm or a leg or something. And so that was the last one. Let me see. I read it, and I did not. Okay, so I didn't read any short stories in November, but December was when I finally read The Haunted Man by Charles Dickens. And I have mixed feelings because Charles Dickens, with his shorter works, it seems like I can't get into it as easily. Like, I think the other one I read was, of course, my reread of Christmas Carol, and I know that story so well. It's been part of my life for years. My dad played the Ghost of Christmas Present at a local theater production back in Maryland. It's kind of, and I've seen a lot of the adaptations, so I know the story. And then so when I read it, it's very familiar. And even the part that a couple years ago, when I first physically read it, I thought was a little long and boring and tedious, I ended up realizing it's not that bad. It's not that long. The parts that I thought were like long. And so I know the story so well that it was, I know the dialogue and everything, all the different lines that they use in every adaptation. There are certain lines that use throughout every adaptation. But with The Haunted Man, I had never read it before. And Dickens is a very wordy author. So it was like, sometimes I was reading. So, which I already talked about this, I think, in a wrap up, I want to say. Because I remember talking about this on camera. That, it's just, he uses so much words to the point of, I get lost and confused in the middle of what's going on. So yeah, I need to reread that one and The Chimes. Okay, so that was all the short stories. So now let's talk about the biggest category of all, the nonfiction category. Nonfiction, like I said, I was very surprised that I read as much nonfiction that I did. And as I started to say earlier when I first started filming this video, I think what really helped was that I started each month, the first couple months, with including nonfiction in that month. Like, In January, I read SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome by Mary Beard, which I have heard about, which, as I said in my favorites video, because I put this one was in my favorites. I really liked, I thought I heard about it from Book Olive, or at least heard about the author, Mary Beard. But this was, as I said in my favorites video, I think this is a good place to start for if you want to learn about ancient Rome. And I do think it's a good thing to maybe freshmen in college might, if you can't read a book like this in high school, maybe in college a freshman should read this if they're studying ancient Rome. Okay, so, and I mentioned the one audiobook I read in February was, the second audiobook I read in February was The Invisible Orientation Introduction in Asexuality by Julia Sandra Decker. This is the one nonfiction I read in February. I did not read any nonfiction in March. I did not read any nonfiction in April. Did I read any nonfiction nope, none in May. None in June. And July is when I started reading nonfiction again. So I read 3 nonfictions, I think. Wait, no, that was until August. July was, I only read 1 nonfiction because it was Jane Austen July, so I picked a Jane Austen related book, a nonfiction. Jane Austen, Her Life and Letters, which I talked about in my favorites. I think it's great for if you want to learn more about Jane Austen because it's her letters. So you get to know her through her letters. You're not just being told by the writer of the book. You are actually getting her voice, Jane Austen's voice. And again, it was the first nonfiction. It was a nonfiction book that actually made me cry when I got to the end. And I think it's really good. And the way it's set up is it goes over each of the books that she published, her most famous works, in each section. So yeah, that was great. That was the only nonfiction I read in July. And then August, I read 3 nonfiction works. Titanic: A Survivor by Violet Jessup, edited and annotated by John Max Tome Garden. And this was really cool because there aren't any books that are from the perspective of people on the crew of Titanic. We get either people that are researching Titanic or people that were like survivors, but they're like the upper class. And this was from a stewardess, Violet Jessup, who was both on Titanic and the Britannica, and she survived both disasters. So it covers her life from, her birth and her previous jobs before she got on Titanic, and her experience as a stewardess and her experience in World War II, World War I and II, I think in World War II, and her personal life, and it was a really cool deep dive into Titanic history, like one aspect of it, of Titanic history. I mean, it isn't the main focus. The main focus is Violet Jessup, but it does have 2 chapters, I think, devoted to Titanic, and that experience and how terrifying it was, and how she was lucky to have survived it. And after that, it was George Washington's Secret 6 by Brian Kilmeade and Don Yeager. So if you've seen the show Turn on AMC, this is about the same thing as that show. Now, this is not what the show is based on. The show is based on another book actually called Turn, Washington Spies. But this is about the same thing, about the spy ring that Washington created. He didn't even know who the members were. And it talks about the women that were in the spy ring, and it really explores how they helped win the war and who was involved in it, how they didn't get credit because no one knew who the members were of this spy ring. And it was I think Turn is a bit of a longer book, so this is not as long, so it's if you want to learn about this, it's a good place to start. So like I said, it's George Washington's Secret Six by Brian Kilmeade and Don Yeager. It's a good place to start for if you want to learn more about the spy ring to get started, and then maybe check out Turner. And then Everybody Was So Young was the other one, and I was so happy to read this one. It's a biography about people, this couple from that group of artists, like Hemingway and Fitzgerald, and the Fitzgeralds and Picasso and all those guys from the 20s and 30s. It's about this, these are the mom and pa of the group, and you don't know, I've never heard of them, so it was really cool to read about them, a couple that I never heard of, and to get kind of a more domestic side to that era of some of these famous celebrities of that time period, and also they were both artists too. And it's sad that we know more about Fitzgerald and Hemingway than Gerald Murphy or Sarah Murphy. So I definitely recommend this biography. Okay, so let's see. And then I didn't read any nonfiction in September. October was when I read The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. I think that was the last nonfiction I read. And that one was really good. I liked that one. That was, of course, one of my favorites as well, along with Everybody Was So Young. And like I said, I get the criticism it receives, but I personally liked it. I liked both topics. And I just think it was great for that time of year because it was partly about a serial killer that I didn't know about. I had first heard about this serial killer actually on a Supernatural episode, which I watched this morning. Not that one, but I was watching Supernatural this morning. But yeah, it was really good. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, it was on my favorites list. So that's all the nonfiction I read. Now let me quickly go through all the books I read all together. So, well, let me just go through each genre that let me talk about YA. I'm not going to, because this video was already long because I spent more time than I anticipated on the audiobook section. So let's just mention all the YA. Six Crimson Cranes was a YA that I read. What else? All the YA. For the Wolf, I read in March. It was another YA. That was a retelling of, I think, Red Riding Hood and Beauty and the Beast, sort of. Once Upon a Broken Heart, I absolutely love that one. It's the first book in the new spin-off series that's in the same universe as Caraval. I have not read I read the sequel to that one. I have not read the sequel to For the Wolf. That's For the Throne. Part of Your World, I think that's middle grade, but I'm going to count it as YA. Which was a twisted tale about like Little Mermaid and what if this happens to this. It was one of the ones I was disappointed with this year. And again, as I always say when I've talked about this book, I mentioned that yes, I'm not the target audience, so maybe that's part of the problem. But I think Liz Braswell could have done better with that one. Like, I love what she did with Ariel. Her progress with Ariel was really great. Ariel matures a lot, but I was surprised, which granted maybe the situation puts Eric in this way, but I always pictured Eric as a little bit more mature and older than Ariel, but he seemed very young in this book. Like I said, maybe it has to do with I'm not the target audience, it's for a younger audience, so she kind of wrote them as a more younger person. But I assumed he was like 18 or 21. And then Vanessa, aka Ursula, was also a disappointment. She kind of reminded me of either Regina George or what's her name from High School Musical. I just watched a couple weeks ago. I watched a video on High School Musical, but now I can't think of the character name. The mean girl in that one, Sharpay. She reminds me of Sharpay too, like a Regina George Sharpay type. And it's like, granted, because she was very mature. And in fact, she was an old woman when we first meet her as Ursula, and then just because she turns into Vanessa doesn't mean she has to act like a teenager. again, maybe it's my fault because I'm not the target audience, but I still like the other books in that series. I mean, the only reason I didn't like the first one is because it felt like the movie, just going in different directions, trying different things, but it still felt like the movie premise. It didn't, basically took the movie and was like, this happened and said, what if this happened? But we would still get to the same goal. Like, the other ones felt more like different, a completely different story, but with the same characters. So I like the Cinderella one too. So yeah, that one. So far, the Little Mermaid one is the only one that bothers me. And of course, I'm always weary about the Beauty and the Beast one versions. Um, so Part of Your World was, like I said, a very disappointing read. I didn't read any YA in May. Ashoka was, I guess, a YA because it was a YA. It's pretty good. It was kind of cool to see this character as a young girl away from a different stage in her life. Okay, July was no, there was I guess Last Night in the Telegraph Club was that. Well, I think that's more of an adult, even though our character's a teenager. I think it's adult. I don't know if that's YA or not. Let's see, nope. Okay, and then let's see, Stardust Thief. I guess in a way, Stardust Thief and City of Brass. I don't know if they would be considered YA. Oh, and I forgot I wanted to talk about classics too, so I'll talk about those next. Classics next. Those are really great. Although I think I like the Stardust Thief. It does explore a type of history. I don't read a lot of fantasy and set in, that kind of in a desert setting. So I really liked that. I think The Orchard was still an adult book, even though the main characters were teenagers throughout most of the book. Mary Jane, I think, was also an adult book, even though our main character is only 14. She was dealing with a lot of adult things. So, and the Hacienda, I think, was adult. I don't know if that was. I think that was adult too. Or maybe new adult. The Hacienda New probably would be considered new adult if they actually established that category. Okay, so adult books, and then the Battle of Never. This is when I read the Battle of Never After, the sequel to Once Upon a Broken Heart quest, and then I read almost the whole of School for Good and Evil, the Camelot years. I almost read the whole trilogy, but I didn't. The holidays kind of threw me off a little bit, so I had to return the books that I had, and then it was still closed because of the holidays, and then we were going out of town, so I couldn't really get the next book. I couldn't go in there to get the next book and return it, so I ended up returning all the books, and I will go back there soon so I can read the last book. I don't know when though. I mean, I thought about today, but this video is taking longer than I thought. So I read The Quest for Glory and Crystal of Time, and I read Gilded, which is a Rumpelstiltskin retelling. So I actually didn't read, in November I read a lot of YA. And The House of Hollows, I don't know if you consider that YA or not. I don't think you would, because I think there's some adult content in there. I don't know if you consider that YA or not, but if it is YA, I read House of Hollow too. Okay, so classics. I did not read as many classics this year, which I know I don't have to. It's not a big deal if I don't, but I was a little disappointed in myself that I didn't read a lot of classics. So I'm actually starting the year with Anna Karenina, which is taking a long time, but I'm working on The Wolf first, and I'll read a little bit of Anna Karenina later today. And I'm off tomorrow, so that's good, and then I have another several days off coming up after I work for 3 days coming up. So let's see, what's classics? I know any classics in January, or in February, unless you count Raymond E. Feist books as classics. If you do, then I read Silverthorn. Okay, so, but when I truly started reading classics was in March. So I read Villette, which I still prefer Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, but I liked Villette well enough. I mean, it was good. It was a good story, but I just didn't connect with it. I didn't love it, so I ended up putting it in the donation pile. But it was still good, still worth the read. And it does explore some things that it explores depression in this one, just like in the Yellow Wallpaper. But at the time they didn't know about it. They didn't know what it was. So it's a very sad story, very bittersweet story, because there were some good stuff, in it, like happy moments. So, and like I said, March was when I listened to the H.P. Lovecraft stories. Okay, and then if you count Dune as a classic, a more modern classic, then I read Dune, the first book, by Frank Herbert in April. That was science fiction. There was no classics in May. And I did read the sequel to Dune in June. And I read the Christie Affair, which is not a classic, but it was kind of inspired by an author who wrote books that are considered classics. So, of course, Jane Austen July happened, and I actually participated in it. So I read Pride and Prejudice, which I loved. And I also read the Northanger Abbey, which I thought was pretty good. It was okay. Okay, wait, I need to go back for a second. When did I read House of Mirth? Okay, yeah, so actually, I did read a classic in April, and that was House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. I love her writing. It was a good story, but like Villette, I just didn't connect with that as easily. I didn't connect with that like Edith Wharton, like Age of Innocence. I didn't enjoy it as much as that one, but it was still a good story and still worth a read, and it's not a long one. Okay, now back to July. So I read Northanger Abbey, and I do think Northanger Abbey is one of the more I feel like we as readers can kind of relate to the main character in Northanger Abbey, which I cannot remember her name. Because of course she's into Gothic literature, she's obsessed with it, and we can relate to the idea. I think a lot of people can relate to the idea of getting carried away, letting our imaginations run away with us. And having our head in the clouds. And I liked the love interest. He was pretty cool. I mean, there were times when he was kind of a jerk to her, a little condescending towards our main character. Like, he just humored her imagination getting carried away with her until it bit him in the butt by her thinking some bad things about his father and thinking their family home was haunted. Okay, so that's all I read and then that's when I also read the other Bennet sister, which again, not a classic, but it was inspired by Pride and Prejudice. It was about Mary Bennet. Okay, and I didn't read classics in August, but I did read March, which was a book that was about a character from a classic. It was Mr. March from Little Women. It was about his story and what was going on during the war for him, and kind of getting to know him and Marmee outside of their children, outside their daughters. So I thought that was really cool. I like it when authors do that, they take a character from a classic that wasn't as explored as much and was kind of a secondary or minor character and expanding on them. Especially if you have enough information on them. So September was I read The Orchard in September, which again is not a classic. It's a modern book, but it was inspired by Anton Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard, which is a classic. I've not read it yet. I have not read any Chekhov, but that's because I'm still getting into Russian literature. And this was inspired by the kids they were reading the play and performing it. And they had their own, our main character has their own orchard, our family has an apple orchard where a lot of important things happen. And then of course, this is when I read the short H.P. Lovecraft, his short stories, and I also read the short stories by Edgar Allan Poe. And this was when I read Perfume. I ended the September with Perfume, which is this guy who was, I think his name was Jean, and he was born with no smell. He was born to a prostitute, and he did not have an odor, but he had a really incredible sense of smell. And he becomes obsessed with finding the perfect scent because he can smell everything. The good, the bad, disgusting, smells all of it. And he's obsessed with finding the perfect scent to the point of he'll commit murder to get the perfect scent. And it's a very disturbing read. Not a very comforting read. And I'm glad I read it, but I did put in the donation pile because I don't plan on reading it again. But it was still really good, still worth checking out unless it's too much for you. And it didn't read like a creepy story. It just read like this guy's journey of self-discovery, even though it wasn't that. Or it kind of was and it wasn't. It is not a long one. Okay, so October. Let's see, did I read any classics in October? Okay, well, yeah, that's when I read In the Shadow of Edgar Allan Poe. So some of those short stories were by classic authors that wrote a really famous work. And The Yellow Wallpapers, a big classic, well-known classic. I didn't read any classics in November. And, of course, I reread A Christmas Carol and The Haunted Man by Dickens. And then I read King Lear, which is now my favorite Shakespeare. And I already talked about that one on my favorites list. I absolutely love that one. And I was going to talk about horror that I read. Well, I guess, yeah, because I didn't talk about every single book on this list. So the horror, and of course I read a lot of fantasy. So horror, I'll talk about horror and fantasy in the same category because, like I said, this is getting long. So I read horror. I read in January. A horror I read was Imaginary Friend. That was the only horror by Stephen Chbosky. That was the only horror I read in January. That's how I started the year. And then fantasy-wise was everything else with the exception of SPQR. Everything else in January was fantasy. So Tower of Swallows, which I did decide finally to DNF The Witcher, and I did put in the donation pile. And actually, I sent it to the bookstore already. As of this video, I wasn't feeling it. I liked when I read it, but then I wasn't thinking about it after. I didn't have the desire to buy the next book. I would think about it's oh, I need to get the next book, but then it wasn't immediately on my mind. So I ended up DNFing that. I did like the show though, and I might still watch that for however long it lasts because I know what's the lead actor whose name I can for some reason I can't think of his name. It will pop into my head, but he left. He filmed 2 more seasons and I think he left because of issues. I don't think he was happy with it. And then I believe he kept getting hurt or something. I don't know the details. Daniel Green's, I think, a good person for if you want to know what happened there. Promise of Blood by Brian McClellan. I do finally have the second book of that trilogy. There's that one, and then Empire of Ivory by Naomi Novak, which those are very quick reads. They don't take long, and they're really fun, and it's historical fiction with fantasy. And then after that, I read Silverthorn, and Plain Bad Heroines was kind of horror. It had a creepy element to it. It wasn't full-blown horror, but there was a suggestion of a place being haunted and people not wanting it to them to film the movie that they were filming. The Blade itself, the first Law trilogy is the only thing I ever finished this year, where I read all 3 books in the 1 year. Silverthorn, Engines of Empire, the first book by R.S. Ford, Across the Green Grass Fields, and Mexican Gothic. That was the horror book I read in February. Okay, March, because I already mentioned For the Wolf is the YA. Once Upon a Broken Arm mentioned. And Son of Shadows, the sequel to Daughter of the Forest, which is really good. I already talked about that one, so I really liked that one. And like I said, this is when I listened to H.P. Lovecraft, 7 stories. And then, so April was all about fantasy with 1 classic. And then a sci-fi. So was Traitor's Blade. I ended up DNFing that one because the first book was fun. It was fun. But I was like, I wasn't into the rest. I didn't want to read the rest of the series. And then Realm of Dragons. I think I'm gonna continue that one and get because I can get the rest of it really cheap on audiobook. And then Dune, the 1 sci-fi I read for that month. And then Part of Your World by Liz Braswell. Okay, so Game of Thrones was a reread. I read that one in May for my birthday month. It was the 1 fantasy read that I read in May. And then, like I said, I read the stories from Skeleton Crew. I already mentioned the Monkey, Kane, Rosette, Miss Todd, Shortcut, the Jaunt, and the Wedding Gig, Paranoid. So not all of those were horror necessarily, or they were different kinds of horror. And then I finally read Breach of Peace by Daniel B. Green. I finally read that. I really liked it. Again, I had a hard time reviewing it. It wasn't that, and like I said, I enjoyed it, and it's not a bad book. It's just I had a hard struggle with reviewing it. But I think it's pretty good. A good start to his series. It was, I think it's kind of like a prologue. And it's a novella. So, and then I read the second book, Before They Are Hanged, in the First Law trilogy. I didn't read the last one until so I didn't read. Okay, so in June, The Dragon Republic was read. Dune Messiah, The Dragon Reborn, and Ahsoka. That was the sci-fi. The rest of them were the Dune, Messiah, and Ahsoka were the 2 sci-fi, and then I read all the fan. There's only 1 non-fantasy sci-fi book on there, and that was the Christie Affair. Okay, and then July was mostly focused on Jane Austen stuff. But I did manage to squeeze in Peace and Turmoil, finally finishing that book by Elliot Brooks. And I did love that book. It was just a long book. And I have trouble committing to longer books. I end up putting them down a lot and then coming back to them. But that doesn't mean I don't enjoy them. It's just, if they're longer, like 500 plus pages, then, I get restless. In The Bone Ship, which I do want to continue The Bone Ship, there was a lot of concepts in that one I really liked. And that was a pirate story, so that was really fun. And Thrawn, I listened to those. Those were audiobooks. And no, that one was not. The last 2 books in July were not. They weren't Jane Austen books, and they weren't fantasy or sci-fi. Okay, and then A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. I listened to that one, which I really liked. That one was cute, very cozy. I don't know if I'll continue it or not, but I did like it. I might continue it, like, periodically. Firestarter, that was kind of more, I think that would be considered sci-fi. Which I'm glad I could, I'm glad I read that one because it's like, not that it was like really, really good. I really, really enjoyed it. I did like it. I did enjoy it. But I'm glad I finally read another novel by King. Because I always feel like I'm behind with the Stephen King project that I decided to do a couple years ago. So Stardust Thief and City of Brass. And then, okay, so those are the last 2 that, that were fantasy and sci-fi in that one. September, did I read anything that was, I guess, The Raft and The Haunting of Ashburn House, which was okay. And then Piranesi was really good. Like, with Piranesi, I meant to read I meant to try to finish Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, but that was taking too long. I was still hadn't finished it, and I wanted to go ahead and get Piranesi, so I borrowed that from the library. I read that one. That's a little bit a bit shorter than Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and it was really good. I enjoyed it. And then we have The Hacienda. We read all those H.P. Lovecraft ones I already talked about, and The Hacienda was horror. I read that one. I think that was supposed to be kind of a Rebecca retelling. Along with, was the other one? I'm trying to think. There was another early that people put this together with that had the same type of story that I read in 2021, I think. I cannot remember what it was, but Isabella Canaz and Oz was The Hacienda, and there was an element of supernatural in The Historian, but I would call it more historical fiction, but it was the whole vampire element. So it's kind of historical. It's mostly historical fiction, but I think there's a little bit of a fantasy element to it. And this is when I read A Discovery of Witches and Wicked, because I was in a witchy mood. The League of Gentlemen Witches, which I did not realize that was the sequel, a second book in a series, but it's a series I feel like I could get away with that. What Moves the Dead, I read this in all those short stories in that collection. Although not all of them were supernatural or horror or anything. And then Horns was in November, which I really liked. And I thought that was really cool. I want to see the adaptation of that one, because I think it would be cool to see Daniel Radcliffe playing this character. I think he plays the main character, Iggy, in Horns, the Horns adaptation. I really like that one. Oh, it's 1 o'clock. I better eat soon. And you guys know that I read The Ballad of Never After, Quest for Glory, Gilded, Crystal Time. So I read a lot of sci-fi November. Fantasy November. Or horror fantasy. It's supernatural. And then House of Hollow and the 2 Christmas stories by Dickens, because they had elements of the supernatural with spirits. In House of Hollow, where these girls were taken to this other place when they were little, but they don't remember it. Well, one of them might. And it was a bit of a twist later. You find out things are not what they seem. Okay, so let's just real quick go over historical fiction, and then I'm done. Okay, so historical fiction. I really should show you my statistics. I forgot to call them, but now already I messed up with the audiobooks and not being prepared with the narrators of a lot of those books. Historical. No historical. Well, Empire of Ivory was historical. And that took place in Africa. It was during the Napoleonic Wars, I believe. And then February, Plain But Heroines was partly historical. Oh, Mexican Gothic. That was the other one I was trying to think of. That was that people compare to The Hacienda. Very similar premises. Like Haunted House in Mexico. And okay, it's just a notification. And so that one was also the Mexican Gothic and the Hacienda were historical. And then I don't know if you would count Son of Shadows as historical. I guess it's more fantasy. Okay, no historical in April. Bridge of Clay, I don't know if that would be considered historical or not, because I think the writing about the 80s and 90s is now considered historical, because it's happened. It's the past. It's, but but for most people, if you were born in that era, you have a hard time seeing it as historical. And if it's been only 10, 20 years, then you might have a hard time seeing it as historical, too. So, I don't know if you consider it historical or not. But I think it is. I think. Let's see, any other historical... I don't know what they were. Okay, so the Christie affair was historical. In the 1920s. Excuse me. The Christie affair is historical. That's what I read in June. And it explores the idea of what happened when Agatha Christie disappeared for a period of time, and her husband had an affair and cheated on her. So, the other Bennet sister, you guys know I read, and I absolutely love that one, which was a story about Mary Bennet and her perspective on things and her story outside of her family. So I read The Family Chow, which that was another retelling of a classic. I forgot to mention that. That's a retelling of Brothers Karamazov, but with the characters being Chinese. And The Matrix, which was a period in history that I don't explore that often. It's kind of a medieval. Well, I do explore it, but in an abbey. There are stories like that I've been tempted to try out, but I feel like I've only read 3 that take place in an abbey, and I'm currently reading one of them, The Name of the Rose. And then March was historical as well, because it takes place during the Civil War, and it's about Mr. March from Little Women. And then The Orchard takes place in the 80s, so that's another one that's do you consider the 80s historical? I personally do, because it's the past, it already happened, and, but I think people have a limit to what they can accept as history. Or at least historical fiction. And, let's see, Mary Jane was in the 70s, so it was the time period that my parents grew up in. That was historical. That was really good. It was a coming of age story. And it wasn't a super long one, but it was really good. And maybe one day I'll get that one. I'll buy that one. Either an audiobook although, I don't know, because Olive's review mentioned that the audiobook version might be good, because what's really cool is there's a character in there that's a rock star. So you get the music in that one. And there's a lot of discussions about music in that story. And then we have... like I said, The Hacienda. This is when I read The Hacienda. And then this is when I read one of my other favorite historical fictions, which is The Historian. Like I said, it does have the element of the supernatural vampires. In this one. And then October, which you have all the classics I mentioned, which, although I guess those aren't historical because they were written in that time period. But The League of Gentlewomen Witches is historical too. It took place it takes place in the past, in the 1800s or something. And then okay, I think that's all the historical fiction. I mean, some of the nonfiction I'm reading are about the past. No historical fiction in November. And that's when I read the last book. I forgot to mention December was when I read the last book for the First Law trilogy. And I can't really consider, and I did not read any historical fiction books in December. December was my shortest reading month, I think. I only read 5 books. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there. So that's my recap of the year. I'll do better next time with being more prepared next year, and in January when I do my statistics and everything, or at least give you a recap of everything. So sorry I wasn't as prepared as I should have been. I hope you guys like this and were intrigued by this recap. Like I said, I'm going to film my Christmas haul, but actually I'm getting hungry, so I'm going to eat lunch. But I hope you guys enjoyed this recap. And if you'd like to share a recap of what you've read, like, you don't have to give me everything, but if you want to share some stuff about how your reading went in 2022, go for it in the comments below. Maybe, or at least give your overall feelings of how your reading went in 2022. And if you guys like this video, be sure to give a thumbs up, click subscribe if you haven't already, and click the bell notification below if you do want to be notified when I post my videos. And I hope you are enjoying your reading so far this year in 2023, and I will talk to y'all later. Bye!